Metroidvanias remain very popular. One of the favorite projects to tackle both from indie studios and large studios alike, with plenty of amazing games to play. And somehow, in this very crowded genre, Ender Magnolia stands out. And if you've grown tired of the genre, or you're highly selective of which games you invest your time into, this one deserves your attention because it does some very special things that I want to talk about. And so hi, I'm Mug. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're not, welcome back. This is my review for Ender Magnolia. If you enjoy it, hit the like button. You know how it works, yada yada. Let's get into it. Ender Magnolia doesn't really do anything special with the Metroidvania genre, at least mechanically. In that sense, it's a good old-fashioned Metroidvania. There's no strange quirks nor gimmicks that it hinges upon. It's not a pinball game, it's not about a grappling hook, it doesn't have anything like that. Its most unique quirks being concepts that come from the previous entry, Ender Lilies, which itself took quite a lot from games like Hollow Knight. But we're going to start off talking about those mechanics before we delve into what I think makes the game truly special. As for playing the game, the most noteworthy elements are things like how it features a level up system, a pretty in-depth equipment and equipment upgrade system, and it allows you to customize a lot of your playstyle, as well as the relic system, which allows you to find and equip relics based on how many slots you have available. Aside from those wrinkles, when looking at the game mechanically, it won't surprise you too much. It mixes quite a lot of ideas from Metroid and Castlevania in equal measure, Symphony of the Night and Order of Ecclesia specifically, with a lot of the more traditional upgrades you'd see in Metroid, and they're implemented through the level design in satisfying ways that often had me remembering the best of the best that the genre has to offer. It uses classics like super jumps or double jumps, sprints, dives, wall clinging, and it uses them together to create different navigational puzzles where you have to carefully consider multiple different rooms together in order to trace a path through them. And in those moments, the game excels, but doesn't really surprise if you're a fan of the genre. And it takes a while to get going and reach that point, and I would say at least 60% of the game focuses more on traversing every single room before it eventually ramps up to those grander puzzles of traversal. When it comes to the combat, it's really good, and I often found myself comparing it to the recent Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, a game that I enjoyed a lot, and I think might just be a tad bit better than Ender Magnolia, but not by much. I think they're pretty close together. The combat itself is fast-paced, relying on dodges with invincibility and different parry options, and has a fair bit of complexity. You can equip 4 different homunculi, but you'll have more than 4 fairly quickly, so you have to choose which ones you prefer. These homunculi are your abilities, essentially, with the main one being Nola. Each of your different abilities, then, has 3 different versions, sometimes very different from each other while maintaining the general concept of it. The parry is always a parry, but the effect might be different. And Nola will always be your basic melee attack combo, but you can choose between a slow axe, a swift sword, or a wide-ranging scythe, and each of these can be upgraded as you explore. Once you're combining all 4 abilities, some of them relying on cooldowns, and using your fairly late unlock of a super ability that charges through combat, there's a lot to keep track of during combat, and it lends a decent skill ceiling and a highly enjoyable flow. Every attack is accompanied with the right amount of hit stop, and the sound design accompanies every slash or dash with satisfying impact, but also clarity for when the whole thing gets chaotic, and it does. There's also more to think about with your build, be it more defensive, ranged, or mobility oriented. You also have to consider if you care more or less about break damage. Most enemies have a secondary bar that takes damage, and once broken, leaves them open and vulnerable, including to getting pushed around and thrown off ledges, which the game leverages for a secondary upgrade currency. However, some bosses don't have a break gauge, which means some of my investments into this hurt a bit, but at the same time, it was easy to go to a save location on respawn and swap some stuff out when it wasn't an option. All of these things, all of the complexity is introduced to you as you progress through the game, adding more complexity at a pace that is masterful and even offering different abilities that you don't have to actually use that work as passives if you feel overwhelmed by pressing so many different buttons and sequences. That pace and that choice is only ever ruined by some difficulty spikes you'll encounter in a couple of areas, and bosses where the game can become unnecessarily frustrating. Bosses never become too much of an issue, with there almost always being a save room just before the fight, with only 2 exceptions I can think of, but certain areas, especially an early area where you're introduced to water, are very difficult, with enemies that kill you in basically 2 hits, and progressing through them until finding a checkpoint requires going through a series of rooms where you have to play very safe and slow to preserve your HP, and you might end up doing that about a dozen times. These are simple issues to solve though, given that all that's needed is just making the enemies deal less damage, but other bumps like this one are frustrating, but they never pushed me away enough to stop, and instead, I just kept throwing myself at it as if it were a particularly difficult Dark Souls checkpoint. Now, of course, since my main complaints are regarding difficulty, it's obvious some people will say that the game is actually too easy, and probably more people will say that it's too hard, and I hope they do balance that. It's one of the more tricky parts of reviewing a game like this, that I don't really know how the average person will take to this difficulty or what they will find difficult, but this is just my experience. And even as I say all of this, I am burying the lead. Honestly, the biggest complaints I have are nitpicks of certain levels and at most a couple of boss fights, and the fact that it doesn't really innovate or break the mold. And that might matter to you or not. To me, it matters in the sense that I play a lot of games and Metroidvanias, and I place a premium on that innovation. And some of you might not hold that against a game like this, but that's where the best part of Ender Magnolia comes in. And that part completely compensates the lack of innovation and allows me to recommend the game without reservations. And it won't be surprising at this point because you've been watching the video, but it's the presentation. What would otherwise be a really well-made, carefully crafted adventure with just enough of everything to string you along is elevated by the impressive visual presentation, the absolutely mesmerizing soundtrack, and beyond that, the combined atmosphere, story, and world building. This game honestly had me excited and pushing through its most difficult encounters because of the setup. Right from the start, it's clear that your progression is to go from the old city in the lower stratum, where I can't help but be reminded of Final Fantasy VII Under the Plates of Midgar, and climb up all the way through the center stratum and into the upper one, with the different neighborhoods, institutions, and facilities that compose each of these sections. The progression is one of moving from the tortured workers and most mutated homunculi infected by the fumes of the lower stratum and unraveling mysteries as you reach the peaks of wealth and comfort, with plenty of secrets that hide even more lore along the way. The design of each area and the visually distinct nature of each of them had me excited to tackle every new level in a way that I haven't really found often in Metroidvanias of late. And it weaves those areas with this feel of them being self-contained, their own characters and storylines, along with grander goals that join together throughout many different areas in surprising ways. And that is where the largest hook of the game lies for me, and what truly set it apart and kept me playing. Introducing a new area along with its antagonist, understanding why that antagonist must be defeated, and then understanding how that fits into the main story and pushes it forward, means that despite its open-ended nature, there was always a hook to keep me coming back even when I got stumped on where to explore next. There was always a major enemy to take down, with motivation to do so, and a compelling mechanical challenge to reach them, where I often felt the reward was to see more of the beautiful world that the developers have created. The devil here is in the details, from the smallest little interactions and environmental storytelling to the way that the soundtrack evolves with these different layered tracks as you move throughout environments seamlessly. Moving from the town area into a more hostile one will maintain the same track but layer new instruments or a percussion on top, and it just keeps this flow intact as you explore. It had been a while since I just sat down and listened to a game's OST, but it's just that good. I guess that in the end, even though it's just a really good game overall, what elevates it is the vibe. It's just got that vibe, it passes my check for it, and I think it'll pass most people's as well. And very often, I found that the reward of the game was just getting to see those new areas, listen to a new music track, or experience a little bit more of the lore of this world. Unfortunately, and this is one of the bigger nitpicks I have with the game, is that maybe that isn't enough reward for some people, and that includes me from time to time. As much as I have great memories of locations in this game and different encounters, some of the secrets are kind of meaningless. It's maybe a lot of effort just to get some of the basic currency that you can use at the shop, of which I was drowning in by late game. When those secrets aren't even lore or some actually powerful secret ability or relic, that there are very cool secrets in the game that definitely transform the way you play, I just felt kind of disappointed of finding a dumb empty room with some basic materials. And I wonder if that was always the intention, or maybe Ender Magnolia, despite its early access kind of demo state that it was in for around a year, is not all the way finished or was intended slightly differently at some point. I hesitate to say that because it doesn't feel like that except when you find those kind of dead ends. But they do bring up the question, why is this even here? It took me around 14 hours to clear Ender Magnolia and reach the first ending, and there is a secret second ending with some additional steps in order to reach it that I'd rather not spoil, but is well worth pursuing. And I would say a grand majority of my time with the game was just wonderful. And I highly recommend it if you're a fan of any sort of Metroidvania. Whether that's Hollow Knight, Castlevania, or Metroid, just give it an opportunity. Between its gorgeous visuals, its excellent level design, and a hook of a story that'll keep you pushing forward, I think it's something that most people should play. If you enjoyed this video, remember to hit the like button, it's always appreciated, and subscribe for more news, reviews, and retrospectives, basically everything gaming. A special shout out to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall for supporting everything I do. I've been Mug, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very soon.